Well, hello, or as we say over here, Dibani Diu. No need to go into the history of the railway. Suffice it to say that the engines and rolling stock are the originals built in the late 1880s, but refurbished many times over the last century and a bit. This first shot was taken in the late 1930s, looking at the cars and the way the people are dressed compared to now. But let's move on into the station. I think we better hurry. I hear it steaming. Oh, just made it. That's good. Off we go. Now the train is rolling happily south, and we being somewhat ethereal, we have time to leave it and slip back to Douglas and see the station as it was many years ago. In those days the platforms were covered with beautiful canopies to shade or shelter the many thousands of passengers, no matter what the weather, and being the Isle of Man, it could be anything from hot and sunny to dismal, wet and windy. In those far off days, well, up to half a century ago, the terminus looked like this. But when tourism died, the powers at that time decided that the railway was no longer needed and axed it, leaving just the bit we are on now. So we'd better get back, as we're almost at the longest tunnel on the Isle of Man. There. While we've been away, the train has moved on, and it won't be long before we arrive at Ballasalla, as this is where the trains pass, this being a single line except at the stations. The drivers must exchange the baton to signal that the line behind them is clear. This of course used to matter much more than it does now, as there are only two trains, which start at the same time from each end and meet in the middle. After that short stop we move on to Castletown, but as this will take a while, we might fly ahead to Port Erin, where there is a train standing unattended, so we can slip into the carriages and see what the Victorians thought the comfort was. So let's see what the first class was like. Yes, very nice, with mirrors and photographs of an even older island. Better seat coverings too. Let's slide through the wall into the next compartment. A bit less pretentious, but okay nonetheless, just a little more Spartan. And finally, into the more common area. Well, of course, in those days, everyone knew their place. And while we're here, we can see just how far ahead of their time the Victorians were regarding what would now be called health and safety, in the form of child-proof locks. The doors can only be opened from the outside. The window drops on a leather strap, and I bet the company lost many to the tourists as strops for their cutthroat razors. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, ask your grandfather. Seems we better leave our look around as it's almost departure time for the next train, and the passengers are getting on board. As we are still back in time, let us look at Port Erin Station about 1910. How do I know it's about that time? Well, the house you see in the distance was built in the late 1880s and was bought by my grandparents about that time. The trees you see reach only halfway up, but even 50 years ago when I was living there, the house was invisible. But enough of my reminiscences. The station road had never felt the hand of Mr. Dunlop and his tyres, only the rattle of shod hoofs. But he and Mr. Ford soon put an end to that. In the 1950s, the station boasted 2 working platforms and sidings, but the buses needed a terminus, so they invaded the space. But the railway managed to hang on to the sidings and put up the carriage shed. How time flies, but here's a clip of an arriving train and it looks well supported. As this is the last train for today, it's time to put the carriages away and the engine to bed. Well, it's a hell of a job, but someone's got to do it. Alexander the Great, get those ashes shifted. And so, good night, until next time.